Scott here. This is the second part of the video on the differential on your W204. So the first part was removing and installing. Now we're going to dismantle the differential and install the Quaife LSD centre. Now the video goes into a reasonable amount of detail. It has to be done properly, so you need to do a bit of planning, get a bit of equipment organised before you tackle it. I mean, the consequences of overlooking something or doing something incorrectly could be quite severe, could do a lot of damage, could even be a safety issue. So, you've got to make sure you're ready and you've got all the gear and ready to do the job. But if you look at it this way, if you're going in for open heart surgery, would you prefer the head surgeon to tell the surgeon, listen, you need to really plan this operation out, study all the scans, make sure you've got everything organised before you treat this fellow? Or would you prefer to have the entrepreneurial type head surgeon with an MBA saying, listen, just get stuck into him, don't worry about it, if we have any problems we'll deal with it then. You're overthinking, you're over planning, you're going into too much detail, it'll never happen. Just get stuck into him. We need to do at least 10 surgeries this week to get our revenue in. Well, I wouldn't like that at all. I think some things in life have to be done properly. Open heart surgery has to be, and so does the dismantling and reassembly of your differentials. So anyway, hopefully I've explained how to do it. Differential project, you need to get a little bit of equipment. First thing you want is a cheap shop press. This is a 6-ton shop press. You can pick them up on special for around 140 bucks Australian. The other thing you'll need is something to release the large circlips on the side of the diff. So what I did was bought a cheap pair of Chinese heavy duty long needle nose pliers, and so I modified them by bending the ends over, and then also I ground the sides there, the last probably 5 millimetres, I just sort of ground them flat on the bench grinder, and they worked really well for taking the circlips out. They're very, very heavy duty circlips holding the bearings in the diff, as you'll see later on. So that gives you an idea of the scale of them. They're about 250 millimetres long, so only $14. Then the other thing I did was I have a small lathe, so I made up a couple of spaces here. So this one is designed to just drop into the end of the standard diff, and that fits both ends, and that provides the bearing surface for the puller when you're pulling the existing flange bearings off. So the important dimension is this one here, which is, I'm measuring 33.85 millimetres, and the OD of the larger flange there is 51 millimetres. The other two dimensions don't matter too much. Overall it's about 23 millimetres deep, and roughly half and half between the top flange and the bottom flange. So that just drops in there nicely, and then your puller, when you're winding the puller, it'll bear against there. And then I had to make another fitting here, and this is to push the new bearings, to push the bearings you take off here onto the Quaife differential centre. So as you can see, that fits over the OD of that. So that dimension Inside there is about 60.3 millimeters, and the outside is is 71 millimeters, and again it's about 23 millimeters in depth. So you'll need those two bits of equipment. So if you haven't got a lathe, maybe you've got a mate who has, or perhaps you have to go to a machine shop and get them made up. And then the other thing you need is a bearing splitter, and you can put it here under the, it'll go under the bearing. And then I made up an aluminium plate with a hole in the middle, some slots on the side, so that slots into there. And I had a sort of universal gear come harmonic balance puller, and so I set that up so I could just bolt it onto this plate here, and then that sits into the two bolts that go into the bearing splitter, and then I was able to pull the bearings off. Now you could just buy a bearing puller. There are slots on the side here, so you could use a sort of a two-arm bearing puller of the appropriate size. That's about 64 millimeters. Yeah, between those two slots, and that's 60 millimeters. The OD there. So if you can get all that organised, then you should have the equipment to do the project. I put the diff on the bench here. It wasn't as heavy as I thought it would be. It's probably about 30 kilos. First thing I'm going to do is just undo the drain bung at the bottom. So that oil's done 56,000 kilometres. So I've drained most of the oil out. Next thing is to take the rear cover off. Oh, that's not too bad. I'm using lint-free rag, or lint-free wipes actually. That's working well. There you go, it's easy. I'll do the other side. That's not difficult at all. So I don't get anything mixed up, I'm placing the diff here with marked rear and then left and right, and when I take the bearings out I'll put them on the left side and the right side so I don't get them mixed up. So that's the next job, is to remove those big circlips. Well, I finally got it out. I'll show you with the other side, I'll show you how I got that out. This was the learning experience. It took me quite a while, but I think I've worked out a method. And the other thing I found, actually using the multi-grips like this, actually helped. Okay, there you can see I've been able to get that end out and rest it against the side, so that I was able to sort of work it up and out. Like this. And if you get this end out and over completely. That releases a lot of the tension, and then I was able to just do that. So that's good. So I should be able to tap that with a small punch. Side, there you go. Right, so that's the right hand side. Just here. There. That was easy. I knocked it in inside rather than trying to pull it from the outside. There we go. Right. Whew. I've just given this a good spray inside with parts cleaner, which leaves no residue and evaporates, so that's nice and clean in there now. So I've set up the bearing puller here on the right hand flange bearing. Okay. Before I remove this bearing, I'm going to take these bolts out and remove the crown wheel, because the bolts are restricting the bearing splitter. So that'll be the next step. Just use the puller then to get this bearing off. So that's it, that's totally dismantled. So this goes in the cupboard now, and we put all these components, the crown wheel, bearings, etc., onto the Quaife LSD centre. So that's great, things are going okay. So here's the Quaife LSD. First thing is to clean this protective grease off the outside. So everything's laid out, nothing's going to get lost. So there's the bearings, there's the clean Quaife. Just boiling the kettle, not for a cup of tea, but to dunk the crown wheel in boiling water so it expands a bit, and then I can drop it onto the Quaife LSD. Stick this in the bucket. Here's my boiled crown wheel. Hopefully that'll just drop over the top. Yep, it does. Amazing. Now just line the bolt holes up. Just put a few in. Okay, I'm just tapping this on just a little bit first to get it started so that it's nice and true. So too bad. That will sit on there, and I should be able to put a plate on there and press the bearing on. It's going on very well, it's going on nicely. That's it. It's fully home. So again, I'll just tap it just to get it started. I'm going to bolt up the crown wheel now to the diff. I'll do it in two stages, so I'll bring it up to about 60 Newton meters first, and then I'll do the final tightening to 120 Newton meters, and I'm just putting a little tiny bit of Loctite on each one, and you do them in opposites. So that's what I'll do. I don't need to show you the whole thing, it's pretty straightforward. So I'll just put them all in and bring them up to 60 Newton meters. Then I'll go around again and pull it up to 120 Newton meters, and you do them in pairs opposite, like that. I'm just working my way around now, just checking, doing the final tightening. I actually made it 130 Newton meters. Looked up the workshop information system, and 130 is a better figure, so I've given the diff housing a good clean with some degreaser, and I'm just cleaning off the old gasket sealant. So I'm just using a stainless steel wire brush. Look how clean that is in there. Got my cornflakes out of that. So this is the material I'll be using. Silicon gasket maker, and they say they recommend this one for differential covers. So that's cleaned up very well, as you can see. Okay, I'm going to put the drain plug back in, just for good measure. I'll put a little bit of sealing compound on it. This is non-hardening. And the other thing that I do that I think is worth doing, here's a couple of neodymium high temperature magnets. You can pick these up on eBay really cheap. They're really strong. They can handle temperatures up to about 150 degrees centigrade, so I like to just put a magnet on the plug there. It's got a steel base, so it'll stick to it, but they won't go anywhere. You can see it's even hard to get it in the hole. Okay, so that's done. Okay, here's the completely assembled LSD unit. Okay. Next thing is to put one of the bearing flanges in. So I'll try with this one here. So obviously that goes with the flat side outwards, because the chamfered side goes against the bearings. Now that just pushes straight into the tap. That's past the circlip groove. Seems to stay inside the circlip a lot better. And I did some tests and I can actually compress this pretty well with my hands. Look at that. Straight in. I just tap it to get it into the groove. So that's in. Now I'll put it onto its side. See, the circlip actually provides the preload. So again, chamfered edge goes in first, and it should just about slide in. Here we go, the gigantic circlip. I must say, you do need strong hands to do this. Beautiful, straight in. Just tap it in. So that hasn't quite seated yet. Okay, now it's seated properly. Just got to go around the outside here and tap it in. When you put the circlips back in, just make sure the gap in the circlip is at the top of the diff, because there's an oil gallery hole. You can see my torch is shining on it. So obviously oil gets splashed into that gallery and then drips down onto the outside of the bearing. So I just had to tap the circlip around. You can put a punch there, and I just tapped it around just to make sure that hole was exposed. So just that's something to be aware of. Here's some 75 W204 fully synthetic differential oil, gearbox oil. So I'm just pouring that into the bearing races. Also pour some on the crown wheel here. The other thing I'll do is there's a channel. There's a channel at the top here that goes down to lubricate this bearing in here. So I'm going to pour some oil down that channel. Okay, I've got the dial gauge up and I'm just checking the backlash with this new Diff. It's a little over 0.1 of a millimetre. We'll put the seals in now. These are new seals. So I'm just going to put a little bit of this sealing, non-hardening sealing compound on just for good measure. I probably don't need it, but I'm going to put it on anyway. Better to be a little bit cautious, I think. I hate to put it together and then have a leak. So I should be able to just tap this into place. beautiful. Now I'm going to put just a smear of rubber grease on the inside of that seal. I like rubber grease. So I'm ready to put the diff cover back on now. The instructions are to place it on and put some bolts in just finger tight. I'm going to put a little bit of anti-seize grease on the on these bolts. Okay, so it says to finger tight the cover and then leave it for about an hour for the silicon to sort of get an initial set. I'm just going to put a little bit more pressure on the fingers just to make sure that silicon oozes out. If you look at the top there, that's what's supposed to happen. So there seems to be a nice bead of silicon all the way around. Okay, I'm going to torque the bolts up now. The specification is to torque them to 30 Newton meters as an initial setting and then turn them 45 degrees. Now, 45 degrees on each one. So it should be easy enough just to guess. So I've already taken the plug out. You can just see the oil level there, it's just below the bottom of the filler hole, a little bit of sealant again on here. So that's the end of this video on how to install the Quaife LSD.